Okay. Hey, good
All right,
afternoon, guys.
so I'll go ahead and introduce the session for today, and this is our May 2024 Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure and check us out and come visit us live the fourth Tuesday of every month. You should find a link in the description to be able to get to the website, and we'd love to see everybody here. There's no limitations. You don't have to have any kind of experience level. We welcome all who are interested in FileMaker, so please be sure and join us. This month, our presentation is with John Howell, and John Howell is going to be talking to us about some conventions for development with FileMaker. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is a presentation that I gave among two presentations at the Build, Grow, Learn conference that Scarpetta Group put on last month, April, in Greenville, South Carolina. And so let's see. I've been doing conventions for FileMaker for over 20 years. I taught them at boot camp. So this is based on something that's been growing over time. I've got some slides on who I am, and I can kind of skip through that because most of you know me. I've been doing FileMaker over 32 years. I've spoken at Engage. I like to do speaker mentoring. My degree's in engineering. But the most important thing is to understand the Lord of the household. That's Buddha, my cat. And he's the one who gives me all the feedback on all the design. There he is guarding the door. And this is what I'm looking at most of the time. That is the view I get of my cat 90% of the time. So when I go into presentations, the most important thing up front is to talk about why. What's the pain point? Why do I need it? So why conventions? I say, first of all, I took this picture downtown Greenville while I was there, and I see the natural organization of not only a building in the background, but a beautiful tree in the foreground. That nature has its own way of organizing things, and so does our mind. And through proper organization, things can grow well. I'm looking at these plants inspire me, but they're so clean and so well organized, and they perform their functions well. You got two different shades of purple, you've got green. Nature has its own organizational skill, and we need to emulate that in our work for a number of reasons. So some of the reasons would be simplicity. Obviously, some of the work we do is extremely complex. And since I'm a simple-minded guy, I've got to keep it as simple as possible, as linear as possible, so I can think from one thing to the next without having to jump back and forth all over the place and have reliability on my work. Keeping it simple makes it easy to code, and it takes away all the stress of a cognitive load, of having a load a lot into your mind. Because if you use proper conventions, then you're able to use muscle memory so that you don't even cognitively have to think about some of the things you do. You can just automatically copy and paste it, start typing from memory because you've done the same approach so many times with such uniform consistency. Conventions also allow us to collaborate. So if two or more of us are working together and we all follow the same conventions, then it's so much easier to understand what somebody else is doing, or to hand your work off to somebody else, or to take over somebody else's work. So much easier to work together when you're all following the same rules. Also really good if you're working on a team and you're going to bring in somebody new who has some level of professional experience, but doesn't know the system you're working at. You can train them a lot faster if they understand the conventions up front than having to have them learn the methodology, or having to bring in somebody who has their own methodology that you have to understand. It's a matter of uniformity across people, which is what collaboration is. And as a lot of our colleagues would say, you're planning to speak to your older self. So you write code now. I have some cases where I have systems that have been in place 17 years, and I've been following basically the same conventions all that time. So when I go back to look at my work 10 or 17 years ago, it all makes sense, and I can remember it very quickly without having to study any of the documentation. At the organization level, conventions help an entire organization structure itself. So across not just one project, but across an entire organization, if we have conventions on everything, not just the FileMaker development, but could be the PHP, could be the JavaScript, it could be the documentation that we use. If it's consistent, then across the organization, we're going to get benefit by it being easy to collaborate at that level. For purposes of planning and documentation, as well as displaying a level of professionalism so that when people look at your company or hire into your company, they can see that the work you're doing is really professionally organized. So it really increases the level of professionalism to be consistent with your conventions. I have a few quotes I like. Eleanor Roosevelt, can't leave her out, takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan. Though this is hinting that when people first see fairly strict conventions in development, it's a little intimidating because you wonder, do I have to learn all this too? And is that going to take me much more time to follow these rules than just doing it from seat of the pants? But it's not, because learning conventions that already exist happens very quickly, and your productivity will increase in performance a lot faster once you get it under your skin. You can go to a new company who has properly documented conventions. Within hours, you understand how to work it. It's very quick. Another quote, Albert Einstein. This I like because it says, out of clutter, which is disorganization, find simplicity, which is implying organization to get to that simplicity. And from discord, harmony. And there's a hint here when he says, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Because when you see something that is difficult and hard to follow and not following good conventions or documentation, and you apply it, there's an opportunity to simplify it and make it work a lot better for yourself moving forward, looking at your older self, working with collaboration, and sharing it among customers. So you can take what's difficult and use the opportunity to make it less difficult, to make it simple by following conventions. Martha Stewart, of course, life is too complicated not to be orderly. Huh? I expect that from her. And here's one from Joshua Beck. If you're going to pitch your dream home, you really going to buy a house that's cluttered? No. So in the same way, we spend a lot of our lives, many hours a day working, and that is our home, so to speak. So you don't want your professional life any more cluttered than you want your own home. You need to apply a lot of the same logic to how you live, to how you work. Here's some other reasons for conventions. Joe Scarpetta is the one who put on the Build, Grow, Learn conference. So I took a few quotes from him because I've onboarded and I'm doing some work for him. And he actually came up with quotes and reasons for his team. So when he onboards new team members, people, they get to read his conventions and his reasoning. And one is this: I've learned with certainty that standards are more likely to be followed and maintained if they are simple, relevant, and consistent. Our standards in FileMaker are about consistency, readability, and predictability. So simple, relevant, consistent, readable, and predictable. Really helpful. It also says, we do a disservice to our client if they give them a system we've written in such a way that they can't decipher what the developer's original intention was. So this starts to hint at displaying professionalism to your customers when they can see that your code is clean. He has a couple more quotes here. Following the standard additionally shows a client that we care about the code being written and that the care is put in place so that they have confidence that anyone on the team can jump in for support. So if you've got a small company and you've got one dedicated developer, there could be some natural anxiety from the customer. What if that person leaves? Anybody can be able to work on it, but conventions will imply a certain confidence in the customer that you know what you're doing and that anybody can fix it. It's not one man's work. And also, like I mentioned earlier, actually, when you onboard a new developer, it takes hours instead of days or weeks to acclimate them to the system. So again, it's about predictable consistency, simple, predictable, consistent. So what I'm going to cover today is not extensive. I'm going to cover some of the basic elements of conventions as it applies to FileMaker Pro, right? So in the schema, I call the different aspects of FileMaker dimensions, and I'll explain the different dimensions, but I haven't come up with a better word for the certain aspects of the application that we use. So one dimension is the schema. And in that, of course, you have tables, fields, and the relationship graph. So I'm going to talk about those three, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Anchor Buoy because that's what about 85% of the community uses. But I'm not going to go into great depth with Anchor Buoy. That's another conversation. Other dimensions in FileMaker would include the scripts and the script folders, layouts and layout folders, as well as the calculation dialogues, how you can be consistent about how you code it for readability across developers, again, for collaboration or for our older self later on. That would include calculations, things like let statements or case or if statements, the while function. I've got standards for that. I use a lot of while functions. JSON, so I'll show you a little example of JSON. What I'm not going to cover, just for time constraints, are going to be other aspects that I would add conventions to in the FileMaker conventions, such as value lists, custom functions, execute SQL, because, and that's the function, not the script step when you're doing execute SQL for data within your database system. I'm moving away from that. A lot of people are moving away from using execute SQL because even though it's context free, it's not real fast. The performance isn't good, and you can run into conflicts. So we're minimizing the use of that. I'm not going to talk about themes because that is a whole conversation in itself, and styles being part of themes. The big note here before I start is I'm not trying to sell anybody on my conventions. I've been developing them. I taught them at FileMaker Bootcamp. I've displayed them at the developers conference when it was called such over years. And I've followed a lot of the standards that Salai put together, and Barney Lawn from Toronto, if you remember him, and other developers. A lot of us have collaborated to put it together. I've worked with at least 30 different people to come up with the conventions I use, but it's not about them. It's the idea of having conventions. So I'll show you mine because that's what I have, and I'll give you comments about that. And it's not an exhaustive list. It's just a kind of a baseline of conventions, but it leads, you'll start to see that the different dimensions can reuse the same conventions. And then you can use that to extend to other things. So even if you're coding in PHP or something else, you might be able to use what you learned from conventions and apply new conventions there that in some ways might be similar. So it's not an exhaustive list. I really want to give you the things that I find the most important in development. But the real point is to establish conventions. Use mine, use somebody else's, use your own. Try to be consistent. Don't change them too much over time, but use them, be consistent through all of your work. So let's talk about schema, which is the heaviest place that we use conventions, right? So you've got tables, fields, and relationships, right? That's the three areas under schema that we're working with. And again, a little about Anchor Buoy, that'll come into play. Here's an example of a system I've written for a construction company. And I'm looking at one view of the names of the tables. And what you'll notice is that they all, and yes, I use underscores, so there may be some variance on your preferences from underscore camel case based on what I do, but just try to get the gist of it. Here's an example of a table name. I use a 4-letter abbreviation. In this case, it's an email log. So I try to use a 4-letter abbreviation that kind of represents symbolically what it means. So later on, if I say CEML, I know that means correspondence for an email log. I could have actually typed the English past it as correspondence for email log, but I'm trying to follow a certain flow alphabetically. So you get a 4-letter abbreviation. I follow that by a double underscore because a double underscore for me is punctuation that I'm going to a new category of the name. And then I'll follow that with the English name, which is also underscore delimited, and I'll use no spaces. I use no spaces in any of the naming conventions where I can avoid it. So my tables will not have spaces, even though these table names will never be used anywhere except in the table tab of the schema as kind of a built-in legend. When you get to the relationship graph, you won't use these full names, but this is where you have your built-in legend on the table tab. So instead of using spaces, we use underscores, right? So here's an example of implementation tables. I go back one slide where here I'm talking about data table names. The next slide actually talks about implementation table names. It's the same convention for implementation tables like your session or your library table we often call preference, or your error codes or navigation, something that's system-wide implementation, I'll put a prefix in front of that 4-letter digit, something like a Z underscore, or if it's an import-export table, it might be a Y. What that does is it moves that set of tables down alphabetically to the bottom so that you don't have to reference them unless you need them. I tend to go with an approach where the most important things that I'm using the most go to the top. And yes, I'm doing everything alphabetically in the schema. So session table will have AAAA, which a colleague of mine taught me years ago, because in my approach, I'm using a session-based approach to coding. That is the table I'm going to hit most of the time. That's the one that has your menus, your dashboard, your report launching tables, anywhere where you've got an interface that's going to be data context non-specific or agnostic. When it's data agnostic, you're going to have a menu table, and I usually base that on the session table. And there that is there. So Z underscore, and then whatever for your implementation tables. Now, when it comes to field names, this is where it gets fun. Don't use any spaces, use underscores instead, just like I did with the table names. So I'll have something like email underscore address. I will not use email address. There's a lot of reasons not to do that, but it's a lot easier to grab the whole name, and it works with other programs well when you're starting to use API type of logic. Here's an example of the same system, and this JCon happens to be the job contact table. I picked this one at random because it's not a huge table, but I'm going to break it up in sections. And you'll notice, yes, I am using alphabetization to categorize my work, but I'll make it really clear for you. Here's your email address falling in the data section. I'm going to use that same system, a different table, for the contract address. This is a little bit smaller visually here, but I can break this apart really well. I'm organizing it alphabetically with keys at the top, implementation at the bottom, data in the middle. So it's organized alphabetically, but also by purpose. The way I code it takes advantage of alphabetization to suggest the category of the purpose of the fields. So keys at the top, where you have underscores, and you'll see a variety of different numbers of underscores, followed by what I call raw data, right? This is not calculations. This is data being helped in table. Follow that by derived calculations, and I might have a naming convention like Z underscore result or Z underscore derived, hinting that this is all going to be calculation fields in this section. That's followed by what I refer to as lightweight audit trail fields. So you'll have the account name, the date, the timestamp when it was created, and the same for when it was modified. I also learned from Stephen Blackwell, it's good to have calculations that get the timestamp and the time and the date of the host from the server, which are triggered on the actual changes of the creation or modification date. So I have fields that are both local and from the server, because I don't trust people's individual computers to have the accurate time when you're on a shared system. Following the implementation fields for audit trail, you'll have, following the audit trail fields, you will have implementation fields, things like the username or the name of the layout or the found count, different implementation fields that you need for your system. They go to the bottom. And right below that, you're going to have things for fields that may be for migration. So you might want to have keys for data migration or temporary fields for doing testing. They'll all have Z's at the bottom of them. It gets a little more complicated by this, but the basic idea is underscores at the top for keys, then the data, then the calculations, then the audit trail, then the implementation, and then the temp or migration fields. I'm going to take this down a little bit further. I'm going to blow it up a little bit and show you this section here and how I break it down specifically. So I'd like to have the primary key have 3 underscores, which pushes it to the very top, because I'm going to be grabbing that most likely in my coding more than anything. So 3 underscores in KP, key primary. So it's a little bit backwards, not PK or FK, it's KP, followed by foreign keys, which will have double underscore KF. So that'll follow the primary key alphabetically. And then you'll have alternate keys, such as your universal one or things that are text fields like active, inactive. And then that gets followed also with an underscore by calculation keys. And you'll see there's a natural order to this where the ones that aren't calculations go above the ones that are calculations by using KA and KC. And at the bottom of that, I'll have a Cartesian key for cross-product joins. It's a dedicated field that never has any data in it, is used for nothing else. It's a global text field, which I know will always be there in every table. And the reason I use that for my cross-product or my X joins is so that I know that I'm never going to delete the field when I'm coding. I have no reason to delete this field, so it's always going to work. It's never going to fail. You can use any two fields to cross-product join, but by having a dedicated one, you know to never delete that field from the system. That's followed again by the data fields, then the derived fields, and in this case, the implementation fields. Now, what a lot of us have moved forward to on the Cartesian key to call it underscore KX underscore Cartesian is like unnecessary because we know the X is going to mean Cartesian. So I've simplified it in newer systems, not like the one you're looking at, to just underscore KX. So that will show where you see KX Cartesian. Nice short name. When it comes to the relational graph, we all know that FileMaker supports bidirectionality, but that gets really complicated. It makes it, FileMaker allows you to use any type of possible management you want to. There's no constraints on it, but there's also no guidance. It doesn't provide any naming conventions. And you can add or edit or delete anything in the relational structure in any order you want. That's native. That's what's given by the program. But again, there's no native or intuitive organizational method provided. It's kind of random, and you can get into trouble real fast. By using bidirectionality, you can end up in very sloppy coding, and it can be really hard or impossible to read moving forward. So that's what's given natively. It also could be really difficult to use in calculation dialogues because things will appear in random order. It's very hard to follow in calculation dialogues, where anchor buoy will give you a lot more order and readability and simplicity to use in calculation dialogues. Also, when it comes to scripting, the native bidirectionality is going to be hard to code just like it is when you're in calculation dialogues. And then you can lose context. So these are 5 big reasons not to use native bidirectionality. Let's talk about anchor buoy. Before I do that, here's a slide someone gave me years ago of a random bidirectionally coded relational graph, and I challenge you to find the relationship between any two fields. That's just a mess. We've all seen these. They're horrendously ugly. What I'm going to show you is much more readable, a lot like what I saw from Ron earlier today, tight organization. So when it comes to anchor buoy, we only use unidirection. It's single direction. It's not bidirectional. It always flows left or right. It makes it easy to read the names if you code it by the standards. And it organizes these related objects for easy viewing and calculation dialogues. This will offer predictive coding, which I can explain a little later. The basic idea is if you're using this same 4-letter key names for primary keys, you're going to get those memorized quickly, and you'll be able to take an existing string of code, duplicate it, use it somewhere else, and change 4 letters and know intuitively that it's going to work without having to reference the graph or anything. So anchor buoy will reduce the need to reference the graph. There's a little bit of downside to anchor buoy. Of course, I forgot to mention the muscle memory that you're able to take advantage of is incredible. It really increases your performance without any kind of reference to the graph. But the downside is that you have to have a little planning to anchor buoy. It works best if you're very strict with the conventions. And the table occurrences really should be built in a certain order. The first table occurrence of every table should always be an anchor. That's the #1 most important rule. Of course, this is not a session on anchor buoy, so I'm just going to go into it a little bit. Here's an example of an anchor buoy relational graph. It goes left to right. The table occurrence is what I call level 1, which is the anchor, will be on the left always. And then the buoys at level 2, 3, or 4, meaning out so far to the right, this is level 2 being displayed only, are going to be all these buoys to the right. And then you may have implementation tables that are like self-joins or one to the preference table. I tend to put those on top of the anchor because I know that those are kind of uniformly used and they have limited purpose. So there's 3 categories of field of table occurrences in anchor buoy. You've got the anchor, you've got the buoys, and the implementation buoys at most. And I've rarely seen anchor buoy have levels going past 4. It's generally the anchor and 1 or 2 buoys. It may go out to the 4th level, and that's about it. So it's very simple. They've proven at the Under the Hood sessions at the Developers Conference year after year that this method of coding is by far the most high performance of any relational graph methodology. Another shot of that is I'm going to break down how I actually do the naming. So we'll use abbreviations and they'll all be in caps. For example, my anchor here is CEMQ, which is my correspondence email queue. Right, that's the anchor on the left. It's got CEMQ. I only use the abbreviation for the anchor, and that's in caps. When I go to buoys, you'll use the abbreviation at the final end of the name is in caps. So you'll see an example here from CEMQ to client, which is a relationship from the contact email notification anchor to a client table. All I'm using is the 4-letter abbreviations from CEMQ to CLNT, and the CLNT is capitalized because that is the final destination to the furthest right that that anchor will go. If I'm using the selected one, like this example here in red, I'm selecting the documentation table, the docs table, but I'm using a global selection method. So I have a global field on the left to a key on the right, and it follows the same thing. So you may have keys that need to be declared. For the example, when I go up here to CEMQ to CLNT, because the client table is the destination and the key I'm using is the client table, I don't need to declare the key, as it's implied that without showing the key that it's going to be the same as the CLNT capital. So I'm using the CLNT ID. But when I'm using the docs selected, that means I'm implying that I'm using a global field. Some of us have moved from going double underscores, as you see here, to using a pipe instead as the delimiter to show what the key is. So everything to the right of the pipe would be the key, and that takes a little less space. So this is a fairly short naming convention, but the pipe takes out a couple extra characters, and you get used to that really quickly. I think I've seen other people, Ron, maybe used spaces in between the pipes, and that's an approach I hadn't considered.
Yeah, I actually use much more, human readable table name, pipe. So the anchor of whatever the anchor table is, the buoys all start with, it basically lays out the path of, what the relationship is, but I just type it all out and separate it with a space and a pipe and a space. And yeah, so
I just tend to avoid, I saw it in yours as well, actually really, really readable. I like that, but I tend to avoid spaces so I don't have any problems later on.
Yeah, I probably could have done well by avoiding spaces, but I've been using it that way for quite a while, and I've not run into really any problems with it so. Yeah.
This way I can use predictive coding in a way that's predictive typing, type ahead feature, and all the different dialog boxes in a way that just makes me comfortable. I think it's gotten to be habit now for 20 years. Up here on the top, I'm showing reference to an external table at ACCS, which is where I'm actually encrypting passwords to an email table because I'm sending email from the database directly and sending copies to people in their Outlook client, their Outlook 365. So
John,
I actually have.
I just wanted to add a quick qualifier. Sorry, but I want the one thing that I like you, I never use spaces in the actual base table names, but in the relationship buoys, I'll use spaces, but never in the actual base table name. So just to clarify.
Fair enough. This here I'm showing, and just to go back so I can see that blue highlight again, This is the external table for email passwords, and they're encrypted, so I keep it in a separate file, so that's why it's all in italics. But you can see the key there is the ID of the ACCS. Now, I don't need to actually show that ID of the ACCS because, again, the capital last four letters in ACCS implies the key. So by wiping that out, that whole table occurrence name becomes a lot shorter. That's an example where I don't need to express the key names if they're implied by it being the same as the destination. Questions on this? Okay. So some of the advantages of Anchor Buoy, when it comes to the drop downs of related tables, very easy to read. Here's an example. They all fall in a certain natural alphabetical order. Easy to see what you're doing, and you're going to see related tables obviously above unrelated tables. When I say easy application of code to the new targets, I can take the code, copy it, paste it, and rename any of the four letters in there and still have the same results in a different context because I'm so consistent in my naming. For example, if I go from quadruple A, which is my session table, to the client table by a Cartesian, and instead I want to go to country, all I have to do is change three letters. From CLNT, it's CTRY. So I just have to change the LNT to TRY, and that relationship will work when I'm coding scripts or in calculation dialogues. Just change the three letters. Or example here, when I'm doing a cross product, again, we've taken the word Cartesian out and made it a lot simpler, and I might also replace that with a pipe. This is something I've added since the presentation in South Carolina. It's something I learned at Tactile that they use a lot. This is really cool. This is called anchor by number. This is where you build a legend in your relationship graph at the top that explains it and has a number of numbers followed by table names in the legend, which gives you an idea where the table falls. So when you get a system, and I've seen systems that have 300 tables, to search in the relational graph or the particular table occurrence you're looking for can be a nightmare. So by putting this legend in, which I call anchor by number, you can just click out. I'll have a demonstration for this in a second. You can click in the white space, then type in a two-digit number. Like in here, you can see I have 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, and I added a 09, and you'll quickly get to that part of the graph. What happens is in front of these numbers, you put a couple spaces because this is the legend. You don't want it to actually trigger here. Then when you actually, so there's two spaces for the legend. I start with 01 and I go up to, God knows, you might do 3 digits. You've got 300 tables, right? Then you follow that with a space in the table name and the legends. So these legends can grow in height. You'll see a whole list of all the tables, maybe in multiple legends, because I use a separate yellow legend block across, maybe 4 or 5 of them across. So you can see real quickly at a glance what table you're looking for, and then you just type in the number. So when you type in like 01, it's going to immediately jump to this table. This is table 1. At this point, I have a little demo for you. Point is to know here, when you actually have the comment, the yellow comment field in the table occurrence group you're using, don't put a space because it's going to catch that comment field and it's going to direct it's going to navigate your cursor directly to that spot. So let's take a look at this real quick. I put it in a video just so we won't have to worry about it crashing. This is the same system I'm showing you. I'm just coming up here and I'm typing 01 and it goes there. If I click in the white space and type in like 04, it goes right to the 04 section. Or right here, I click in white and I type 09, it's going to take me to the 09 table. And here I'm showing you how far away that was from the top by sliding it back up. So that makes sense. It's just a matter of clicking anywhere, hitting the 2-digit or 3-digit number quickly, and it'll navigate you right there without having to search, because the legend's a lot easier to look at than the entire table structure.
That's my money's worth right there for this presentation, John, because
that's why I added it.
I have a system with such a large table graph, and there are certain sections of table groups that, you know, when I need to get to them, it's such a pain in the butt to scroll around the relationship graph until I find it. Like this is gold right here for me. Like this is like something I want to go implement right now. So if nothing else, this is my money's worth right here. So thank you for presenting that.
Thanks.
For sure.
I learned that at Tactile. I was working there during COVID. And when I saw that, I'm like, what's this? And the moment I discovered what it was, it just made life so much easier. And I'm using it everywhere. I actually got Joe Scarpetta to agree to allow me to retrofit his big system with this. And he has 300 tables, and it literally took me less than 2 hours to implement this legend system in one file that has 300 tables. And now everybody can go and search real quickly. The key is up in the legend to make spaces in front of the number so it doesn't actually doesn't self-reference when you type it in. But you'll get that real quick. It makes life so much easier. So it makes it easy to search for a toggle in the relational graph. It reduces the time to find anything. And again, you're using muscle memory because you'll get it. After a while, you'll learn, like I'm working on this quotes table. I know it's table number 59 and the new quotes table is 60. So every time I go in a schema, I just hit 59. You have to use the top numbers, especially on Windows, not the number pad on the right, the one on the top. But if I just type 59 and it's immediate, I don't even have to hit enter, 59 and it's immediately there. So when I'm working in a given system, it's total muscle memory. I have it memorized what the different numbers are for most tables that I work with frequently. And this, again, encourages alphabetical according to the table occurrence groups, because if you put your table occurrence groups in an alphabetical listing in your relational graph, and then you're going to make your legend alphabetical and numerical. That way it's easy to read. You're alphabetically looking for what you want, and then you just find the number next to it and hit the number. So again, I'm emphasizing alphabetization. And I know you don't use that, Ron, so you might use it in certain ways. This approach with Acre is not only easy to build, easy to maintain, easy to use. So on all three levels, everybody benefits. Now, outside the schema, when we get into things like scripts and script folders and layouts and layout folders, let functions, case functions, while functions, JSON, I have strict conventions for that too, that aren't as critical and certainly aren't as hard to follow as the schema, except when it comes to scripts and layouts. I'm also using an alphanumeric approach that kind of emulates what I'm doing in the schema in a way that really helps. So let's look at scripts. I have a script template. And this happens to be one that Joe uses, and it's a hybrid of his and mine. So I break it down into different categories. This is my script template, which I have as the very first script in the script manager. So you can just grab it and duplicate it anywhere. Let's break it down. You got a header section, which would be like the title and the purpose. I actually put the name of the script as the title. So if for any reason I clumsily rename the script, I've got it documented inside the script, as well as the purpose, what it does, who made it, when, excuse me, what the version is, any parameters. Also, you might have dependencies listed in there as a line, and then the modification history at the bottom that will keep adding as you keep changing that script. That I refer to as the header. Then you've got setup, which generally is going to be like allow user board off. It may have error trapping on. It's generally going to have a commit records request, which is something I think that is important to use frequently, committing records when you know you want to get something committed before you switch, especially when you switch context. So I'll put that right up in the setup section. Then I'll have other sections such as notes, validation, for which I use equal signs, kind of a hint, equals. It means it has to equal something you've set up as a validation. So all my validation code will go between the equal sign. All my testing will go between the commercial A or the @ sign, because that's like a really loud thing. You're going to put your testing in between those so it'll stand out. And when you're all done and you release a system to production, I'll often delete everything in the testing section. And it's easy to find with that commercial A. Then the actions will often be separated by hyphens in between the different actions. So you might have an action that says, create a new record, and at the bottom, and create new records. So you're kind of doing it like HTML, where you're sandwiching in the work in between the lines. So it's easy to reference. So these are the different sections I'm doing, and you don't get lost. It's easy for other people to follow. At the bottom, The footer, this is something a friend of mine who's a contractor to Tactile brought out. You always should have exit script at the bottom. So if you're working through a script debugger, you can always get there and stop there without leaving the script after everything's happened. And always in exit script, if you're not going to exit the script with a script result, then always put double equals. Never leave it null. Because if in the middle of a long script, you're pulling script results, you could by mistake pass that script result out of the script, and that's a bad idea. So there's either going to be a script result here at the bottom, or there's going to be double equal sign, not null. Because the double equal sign will ensure that you don't pass out erroneous information by mistake. Below that, what are these 4 comment lines? I've been told, because I'm
John, real quick, you keep saying double equal. Do you just mean double quotes?
That's what I meant. And
Okay.
sorry.
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Yeah, sorry. Double quotes. Thank you. That's followed by 4 comment lines that just have like 3 asterisks. And the reason for that is on Macintosh, a lot of times when you have a long script and the script windows up, you won't be able to see the bottom of the script and know you're at the end. But if you're coding and you're doing the arrow key and you get down to 4 comment lines that just have 3 asterisks, that tells the Mac developers on your team that that's the end of the script if they're not able to see the bottom, and it saves them time from having to hunt for the end of the script. This stuff makes sense? Good. So consistent coding and scripts based on a template. Script names, I am strictly using an organization method that includes an abbreviation up front, followed by a number, and then the script name, and followed by the type and function. So for example, here, CTRL, I know that means that's a control or a handler script. It's going to be in a folder called CTRL, as like you can see it at the top here. Then it's going to have a number, a hyphen and a 3-digit number. And literally, if you ever tell me what's a CTRL 011, I'm going to tell you that's a just window to fit, because I use that same one all the time. I will end up memorizing a lot of these frequently used scripts by having an alphanumeric, and in that order, alphanumeric coding, keeping them in an order. And I'll put punctuation marks. So you can see I stop at 17 here and then I go to 21. That leaves me room for insertions without ever having to rename it or renumber anything. So I will jump whole sections. And just when I know I'm only going to have 2, I'll keep them together. I'll put a breaker bar in between. So wherever there's a break in the numbers, there'll be a breaker bar. Very, very, very easy to follow. When it comes to script folders, they're going to emulate the script names. They're going to also have an organizational method that may not be alphabetical. It may be more functional, but you're going to have an abbreviation followed by the folder name. I like to do it in caps. I place these folders in the general order of usage, meaning when a user's logging in, well, either it's going to be a server-side function at the top, or it might be login and different events that naturally would happen in the order of the usage of the system most likely. So SRVR always means server script schedules to me, right? So you've got a 4-letter abbreviation, which you're going to use in the script naming, which is the alphanumeric. And this just won't have the numbers, but every script within it, within SRVR folder, will be SRVR 001, 002, and so on. So there's a natural order of organization. Moving on to layouts, again, the same concept. I'm using a 4-letter abbreviation, followed by the table name, and possibly followed by the purpose. So in this example, CLNT means it's a client-based table, as you can see to the right of that, where it actually tells the name of the table, followed by the name of the client and the function, which is a detail layout versus a list view later on. So I want to be right in the name of the table, of the layout name, the instruction as to what the table, the very first letters are going to be what table am I on. So when I open up the status bar and the first 4 letters, I know, oh, this table's based on that layout. I don't have to be in layout mode to see it. Followed by the name of what I'm doing, followed by the functionality. Layout folders, same idea. They may not have the 4-letter abbreviations, but they're going to be organized in order by both category and purpose. So you'll have interface folders at the top, followed by list views, followed by form views, that kind of thing, followed by cards and reports, administration, and then I'll have at the bottom master layouts, which are those all field dev layouts, followed by either blanks or something else. So I put the blanks below the masters, and all of that goes to the bottom. So in each one of these folders, there may be dozens of layouts, but they're easy to read. You'll notice here I also have a start layout and an end layout separator. This allows me to actually capture the numbers of the layouts only in this section. If I'm going to do something like go to layout based on number, I only use the ones that are going to be used in the user interface, while all these other ones are all implementation. All of these are implementation layouts. Any questions on that? Better simple organization. Other miscellaneous ones at the bottom. Okay, let's talk about functional calculation dialogues, basically. When I look at the let function, the native formatting looks like that. That's a little hard to read to me. Even though I know the let function real well, I find it messy, and I'm not going to code it to look like that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do a let with an open paren, and I like to put the square bracket below it, because that lines up with the closed square bracket visually, a little more like HTML. And then I will have a tab for each variable that I'm declaring, and a tab for the calculation at the end. And what I've moved to later on, you may see it in some of the slides, is the close paren is no longer at the outside. It actually gets indented along with the calculations. I think that'll show up in some of the other functions. But this is the basic format for let function, and I'll use the same approach towards all these other type of calculation dialogues. So case function, that's how it looks by default. A little hard to read personally, right? So I'll do it this way. I'll format it with an open paren and then an indent, and in this case, first argument, first result. Second argument, second result. Third argument, which may, the third will actually be the result, because there won't be a third argument in this case. Either 1 + 1 = 1, or it equals 2, or I suck at math. And then what I'll do is I'll put the close paren indented with everything else. Now, I fought this, but Tactile used it a lot, and I found out when you've got functions within functions in a very large calculation dialog, this actually works a lot better on the eye to have that final indent, that final closed paren indented with the rest of the logic. I'll take the same idea at the while function, because if you look at that, doesn't make a lot of sense to me natively. But when I have a while function, I'll build it like this. Open paren, again, square bracket below it. Then indents for the different initial variables, close paren, semicolon. Then the condition, indented. Then the logic within square brackets, indented. Then the result. And then again, the closed paren, indented. Here's an example of one. It's a little smaller, maybe a little harder to read. While function, I've got a number of variables I'm declaring, and then a closed bracket. Then I got my condition, followed by my logic, which may do a lot of complex stuff. And here, look at this. I'm building JSON by setting an element. I'm following the same indenting logic, building my JSON within the while function, again with the closed paren indented. So it's really easy to see what I'm doing at first glance, just in building the different logic steps. Then I close it, you get the result. In this case, it's just the JSON, and again, close paren, indented one. Now, that wasn't enough for me, even though that's pretty easy to read. I took it one step further, and I added annotation. Look at the difference, without and with annotation. Now you could just go to the right and see what you're doing on every single line, and I line it all up so your eyes can just go down and look at the annotation, and it doesn't interrupt the reading of the code. And this I've worked out with a number of other developers, and we all agree that this is far more readable than any other approach. Because while functions, as you know, can get complicated. I have custom functions that have 3 while functions nested within each other, building JSON and stuff. And doing it this way, I can follow it. But if I didn't, they become completely unreadable very quickly. Certainly, you've got some comments on this.
Definitely looks nice. I mean, I'm just thinking about a lot of my stuff, even the text wrap that happens within the calculation dialog when you, if your conditions and your variables or however you're doing it gets long enough, then it's going to text wrap, your comments to the next line. And that can get kind of messy, I would think, but I think
It can, yeah.
yeah.
So,
But there's
every
some
situation is a little
application for it,
different.
yeah. Yeah.
The while function is the most complex function that we have, as I understand it. So if you get this, then everything else is simpler. Now, if I go into JSON, this is pretty easy. That's the native formatting, and we're all used to that. But I tend to want to do it this way. If I'm starting with no JSON, empty quotes, there's no reason not to. And then if I'm declaring multiple objects within the JSON object, I will indent them and line them up like this. So that's much, and again, the indented close paren at the bottom. It's just more readable. It's just easy to follow this than just have them all on one line or wrapping or not aligned. I'm pretty strict about this because I can read this and I don't have time to waste my cognitive load trying to figure out what's in a JSON object that I'm building. And actually I have a lot of custom functions I've written that will build the JSON and extract the JSON. And I hardly even need to know JSON anymore. I know how to pass parameters into custom functions that will do all this for me in the back end, but the custom functions are built like this. Auto enter fields, same thing. I like to have Booleans. So I might have something that's underscore KA1, which means the results is going to be a 1 if the override has duplicate job. If that's been declared that I'm overriding a job that has a duplicate, it's going to be a 1 or a 0. So I'll always use get Boolean of self. So even if you wipe it out, you're going to get a 0. You're either going to get a 0 or a 1 just to make it simple. And this is basically the bare bones conventions that I like to cover. There's so many other dimensions to look at, but if you get these and you follow these, the rest becomes easy. So again, conventions, choose something, I don't care what, but apply them consistently and know that might have evolved over time. They're going to change. They're not going to be rigid, but they should maintain an underlying theme even as they evolve. So I look at my conventions I was using 15 years ago. They're not that much different. I can still follow them. But as the application and the coding and the world gets more complicated, things have to organically grow. But if you grow it based on something solid, you're not going to reinvent the wheel every 5 years, right? So these are just suggestions. You may have better ideas. I have collaborated with a lot of people, so this is not something I've done alone, so I won't take even credit for it. But, I know, Ron, you've got different ideas than mine, and you've got good reason for them. The point is to pick something and go with it. Something that if you died tomorrow, somebody could pick it up and follow your code without a lot of work. This Acre buoy stuff was an overview of a presentation I gave in like 2009, I think. So there's links here to the original presentations. I can give you a copy of these slides so you can get them and you can look at it. It's a 96 slide presentation on Acre buoy, so that's available for review. And a little bit of final quoting here. For every minute spent organizing, an hour is earned, Benjamin Franklin. And my quote, conventions are the best place to channel your inner perfectionist. So I get a lot of my perfectionism out by doing this so that I don't have to think like a perfectionist. I've already painted the landscape with how I'm going to approach my perfectionism. That actually frees me up to be creative without getting too finicky about being perfectionist. I get it out of the way up front. That's it. Thank you. Questions, conversations?
Very nice. Definitely enjoyed that presentation. It's funny that last thing you were talking about, sorry. The last thing you were talking about getting your fulfillment and your perfectionism, it's like there is something very satisfying in having that organization and having those conventions in place. And yeah, there's something very satisfying about seeing it all
Indeed.
lined up and organized exactly to what, so that's kind of funny. I never thought of that, but I do get a certain amount of satisfaction over out of getting everything lined up the way all the conventions lined out and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Easy to satisfy audience.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, a bunch of developers could debate for hours on what is the best conventions, and there's really no such thing. But a lot of conventions with a lot of good and bad reasons. So, it all works out. Oh, hang on.
Mine have been worked out about as far as I need them to work out, so they're pretty stable at this point. Question on this presentation, if I send it to you, do you have a place in your new system to load demo files and stuff? Have you figured that out here, Ron?
Sorry, John, I was having to stick my head out the door and ask my lawn guy not to do his lowering right at the moment. So what was the question?
The question is, in this new wonderful website you put up with WordPress and PHP and FileMaker and Data API, do you have a place to put binaries like demo files and presentations for people to download from there? Have you done that?
No, I don't, but that's kind of on my list of things for wanting to do. The presentations, like I had to create a field for supporting links for download links and stuff like that to be able to convert the URLs properly. Because I'll tell you one thing, I absolutely love the get as CSS in FileMaker that was introduced. I don't know even when it was introduced. I just realized it was in there recently. But I had to do a PHP function to take a URL and wrap it in a link to create it into a link. But the CSS, the get as CSS interferes with that. So if I take the field from like the description field and I create a field that does get as CSS that I can pull to the website, if that PHP function then tries to go through and grab any URLs and convert them, it gets all jumbled up. So I had to create a separate field to put in the supporting links and not do get as CSS and have anyway, that was kind of a tangent. But yeah, so there'll be supporting links available in the archive and everything. But as you were saying, yeah, I was on my list of features that I'd like to include is the ability for a presenter to like load up demo files and stuff.
Yeah. What we could do in the short run is I've got an ongoing Dropbox professional account. I'll load them up there and I'll just send you the links, and then you can put them on the website and people can use those links to download the files.
Yep, absolutely. All the supporting links that you can provide will be included in for the archive and everything. So
okay, I'll give you the Anchor Buoy link and then the link to this presentation file and that little simple FileMaker file that I built the anchor by number, so that you can use that as an example. Maybe even copy paste some of the idea.
Yeah, I'm excited about implementing that because with that giant graph, it's right. I'm excited.
Yeah, not everybody sees the benefit of that, but when you're doing something like you are, you get pretty complicated stuff, and you're like, after you've searched so long and have to scroll sometimes 10 pages down a number of times, you're like, there's got to be a better way. So these people provided it to me, and I'm very thankful to have it.
Especially by the time with a number of very large table groups and all that, and not only are they lined up vertically but horizontally as well. So it's like, then there's these groups that are somewhere right in the middle of the graph somewhere, and it's like if I scroll too far horizontally and then I go down vertically, I've missed it. So it's over here. So I am super excited about that one.
Sometime offline, Ron, I'll show you, because I can't show this to everybody, an example of where I actually have like 4 or 5 legends across, because they're all like vertical. And so I break the legend up to like 0 to 100, 100 to 200, that kind of thing, so that you don't have to try to create separate columns in one comment box. That's really hard to do. So I just break it up into separate comment box.
I appreciate that suggestion as well, because that graph having one legend, one legend would take up, a big portion of the opening graph screen. Yeah, be kind of weird. So.
It's always at the top. It's always at the top because it's the first thing you see. And like you go alphabetically and you look, okay, I'm looking for finance. So when you find the F on this number 43, you just type 43, you're done.
Yeah.
And putting it, even retrofitting this will take you maybe even a large system, a couple hours. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it doesn't, I don't think it's going to take me long. And I'm, like I said, I'm going to jump right on getting that implemented into this system because it's going to save me a lot of time and hassle. But I never even thought of that capability so yeah, that's great. So I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff we learned from our friends and our colleagues, right? A lot of
Yeah.
the stuff I've shown you, I didn't invent. I just put it together.
Yeah. Yep, very nice presentation and definitely the takeaways of just, consistency is the most important thing so that for
Absolutely.
yourself and for others, it's consistency for myself, most importantly, because I'm the one that's working in it all the time. But I always like to consider, the developer that comes along next. God forbid what should happen. I always think of it in a positive light, like what would happen if I won the megabucks? I'm probably not going to be sitting at my computer doing FileMaker
No,
or
right?
if I win $1 billion, and I'm
Yeah.
probably going to be hard to get a hold of.
Right. There
So,
you go.
so yeah, I always try and consider the developer that's coming along next.
So I got a question for you.
Mhm.
And we didn't record it, but you gave a presentation earlier about how you built this wonderful website. And, I don't have those skills. And if I wanted to gain the skills that you've got, is there any way you could describe a roadmap of how one would gather those things, the WordPress, the PHP, in order to put together something like that? How do you go from ground zero to where you're at?
It has certainly could not point to a roadmap that will get you from point A to point B because there's so many tangents and so many different directions and it's been an experience, especially trying to find video presentations and tutorials and things that will cover just so much of what you need. And I think you and I have talked about before the frustration of so many of them that kind of gloss over stuff that they like already assume that you know.
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, well, here's a big important piece of the puzzle, and they just barely mentioned it. Now I've got to go research that and find videos on that part of it before I can even move forward with the video that I was trying to, yeah. So yeah, I'm unfortunately I don't have any kind of recommendations that would help you. I mean, it's Google, and just
Yeah, I would say for simple things like if you wanted to get certified, if you wanted to learn the data API or certain things, I go to Computing University. I make a
yep.
purchase
And
that every year because I spend weeks studying their stuff. I mean, a lot of hours, but they put it together and they cover almost every little point very well. Between Mark and Stu, they do really good work at delivering a course that helps you capture all the little things. Now, they're not doing WordPress, they're not doing PHP, but a lot of the FileMaker and the external stuff with like Data API and OData, they've got great coursework on it for that.
yeah, I have their university package and I've had it for years, and I may not look at anything for a year, but then,
Right.
the next year there might be one or two things in there that are worth the price of admission just because of how well they lay it out. So yeah,
Exactly.
those guys are really great.
Good people.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
You
Well,
want to turn that off, the recording?
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording for the session. But just wanted to make sure to say once again on the recording, thank you again. It was
Yeah, welcome. That was
well
glad it
presented
was well
for
received.
sure. Absolutely well presented.
Yeah, thank you, John.